Hello, everybody. How are we doing today? Welcome to another session of Wacom webinars. Today, we are all going to be talking about believable color, light, and texture with our guest, Joel Santana, AKA the Mad Hatter. He is a gaming 2D concept artist, children's book illustrator, husband, father, amazing Wacom friend. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Elizabeth Garcia, social media manager for Wacom. We will be spending some time with Joel this morning, about an hour long session, but he may go over because he likes to paint and we like to watch him paint. We will be answering questions as we go along. Obviously, we would like to save some for the end, but as I see your questions, I'll be fielding them and asking Joel your questions throughout. Please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. You can use your comments, shout outs and stuff on the chat where we'll be sharing some details and promotions. Please be sure to follow Joel Santana everywhere on social media. He's a very inspiring artist, always sharing interesting tidbits and just sharing his process. And for all of us joining, please take advantage of this amazing Wacom discount that we have on our e-store, $50 off Wacom One or $50 off Wacom Cintiq 16, valid through May 19th with the code WacomJoel. Joel, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen because it's all yours. 1 second.
All right, awesome, very cool. Well, let me see if I can, first things first, just make sure I get my screen sharing here. Let's see. And let me know if it shows up on you guys' end.
We see it.
All right, cool. And let's see. All right, awesome. So as Elizabeth mentioned, I am a concept artist and illustrator. And again, my name is Joel Santana, but I want to thank you guys so much for joining us here today. I wanted to kind of just go over some of my process. If you're not familiar with my work, then I guess you'll just be kind of hearing this for the first time. If you have seen any of my tutorials or just follow me, you know that I always like to share that when I'm talking about things like this, I'm just kind of sharing my process. So I'm not saying that this technique is the only way by any means, or even the best way. It's just the way that I do it, and the way I've found success in that. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, I'm just going to kind of go over my process here today. So not going to be able to like touch on every little thing or even take this image like to a super final polished finish, but I want to kind of run through enough things to kind of share enough of so you can get the gist of my overall process. So before I get started, just some quick things I'm going to go over here as far as like my layers. I don't have any rule on like, hey, I try not to have too many layers or I try to have as many layers as possible. There's no, it's whatever I need for the job. And then sometimes on however quick I'm trying to move also will determine what my workflow is like. So, or as far as like my layers. Right here for today, I just have everything blocked in just for the sake of time. So I blocked in the little house. I blocked in Snoopy. Just roughly, some things might change. I might change some of the little details here and there, but for the most part, that's that. And then separately above each fill shape, I have my lines. So I have those lines separate. And for the most part, that's pretty consistent. No matter what I'm doing, my lines are on one layer and my shape is on another, for the most part. As far as, let's see, brushes, I do use brushes from that just kind of come with Photoshop. Kyle's brushes, there's so many options there. And to be quite honest, I only use a handful. As far as painting brushes, I've been using these brushes by Lowish. And you could check her out on Instagram. But also she's got some really cool brushes on Gumroad. And so you could check her out. I've been using 2 of her brushes for quite some time now. I get some good texture with this oil pastel brush. And then this hard round brush I use for a quite variety of things. But outside of that, I don't really use super fancy brushes. I mean, if I need to do like Freckles or something very specific, I'll look for something like that. But for the most part, I'm just painting with like 2 or 3 brushes. Kyle's brushes, I use this drawing box. Let's see, the Perfect Pencil. I like to use that. That's what I used for all these sketch lines that you see here on this piece. And then people ask this all the time, so I'll just go ahead and share. I do sketch in Photoshop. I love sketching in Photoshop. I get a lot of freedom with, or a lot of, I should say, like flexibility. So for example, with Snoopy, if I am unhappy with the size of his head, I don't know if I want to go like really big, exaggerated, I can do that fairly quickly and easy in Photoshop. Whereas I can't do that if I was sketching on paper as easily. Another quick thing about my tools, some of you, it might be obvious to some of you, it might not, but I am using a Cintiq Pro 32-inch, and then it's all plugged into my MacBook Pro, and so that's what my setup is right now. One last thing is, I mentioned I do sketch on paper. I love sketching on paper, and so I often sketch on paper. I don't have a fancy scanner. I just kind of take a picture with my cell phone, email it to myself, and then bring it into Photoshop. So again, let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with this house here, and I'm going to create a layer on top, and then I'm going to clip it. And what that does when I do this here, by holding Alt and click in the middle, it just kind of traps all of my paint inside of this shape, the shape of this house here. So before I do that, I just want to kind of run over some of the things that we're going to cover. We're going to cover color and values, and I kind of grouped that together, and I'll explain why in a second. We're going to cover texture, and we're going to kind of cover light. Should be like in this order. I might bounce around a little bit, but for the most part, should be in that order. Before I get started on actual painting, one other thing, I promise we'll get started in just a second, but just kind of covering things before we start. I like to do these spheres. If you've taken any of my classes, I have a class with Domestica, and I kind of go over this, or I go over this in a lot more detail. I'm not going to be able to do that today, but essentially what this does for me, this sphere, is it's my guide. So in this case here, it's very specific to what I'm painting. It's red, wood, and it's got some like little dings in it. That's what this house is going to have. So this not only tells me what the direction of the light, like what that is, where the light is coming from, it shows me where my shadows are going to be. This becomes a very quick, I'll show you right now so that we can get started. This becomes a very quick way for me to use the color, the eyedropper tool, and then start. Let me change my brush. I'm going to use the hard round brush. And I usually leave my flow at 25% up here, and I don't really touch the opacity. I'm going to increase the size of my brush. So again, I just use what this does is, it's a quick way for me to just use the eyedropper tool. I know that these are my lights, these are my shadows, and then this is the cool light on this side. So it's just a quick way for me to get started. And so again, because my light is coming from the top right, it's going to hit this side of the house. It's not going to catch this over here. And because it's coming from up top, you know, a lot of painting is, a big part of painting is making intellectual guesses. And with those guesses, a big part of that is understanding. When you practice enough, like doing spheres like this or painting from observation, the way that you guess how the light is going to interact or react in a scene, you start to become a little bit more knowledgeable and make better guesses at what that might look like. So because this is coming from the top, I believe that this is going to leave a shadow right under here. I believe that this top part is going to cast a shadow under there. Might be obvious to many people, but you know, again, when you're kind of first getting started, there's a lot of things to think about. So real quick, I'll just mention now, the reason why I have color and values kind of grouped together is because I'm painting it all. I'm thinking about these two things all at on one shot. So right here, yeah, I'm dropping in like some color, but I am thinking about light, and I am thinking about values, which values are, you know, your lights and your darks, and everything in between. So I am considering all those things while I'm dropping in my color. Some people do where they paint everything in black and white first, and then they kind of, you know, you might use like set your layer to color blending mode, and then paint the colors in afterwards. That's a cool little trick, but I don't know. There's something more that feels more natural and more free, just more enjoyable to just kind of dropping in my color and my values and everything all at the same time. So again, as I'm using my eyedropper tool, I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna pick my cool light, and I'm gonna start to drop that in. And again, this isn't gonna be, just bear with me, this isn't gonna be like a super pretty, you know, polished painting. This is just to kind of show you, again, just my thinking. How do I, you know, how do I paint? How do I take an image from concept to finish? I wanna
Hey,
say
Joel.
that, yes.
Andres Jaramillo really likes your sphere idea. How did you come up with it?
Oh, the idea for the drawing?
No, for the sphere, like the solution to
Oh,
work with.
the sphere. Okay, yes. Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. This was not, so it's not my original, this is something that I've seen it a lot in the digital space. A lot of artists will use this technique. And there has several advantages to it. Um, One of them is that you could paint these. This will take, like, this could take you, depending on, you know, first when you get started, it might take you a little longer, but you could easily paint one of these spheres in about 15 minutes, or it might take you a little longer. It's not about how fast you do it, but the point is like, it's really good practice. It makes you think about light, it makes you think about shadow, it makes you think about texture, and you're not worried about, see, even Snoopy has simple shapes and easy to paint, but there's a lot to think about. With a sphere, you're just working with a ball. And so it's very quick to kind of get you to think about how the light lands, how the shadows fall, you know, your cool colors, your warm colors, all of that. So as far as coming up with it, I've just, you know, it's just something that you learn along the way as you continue to learn from others, as you do research and you find what other people are doing. It's just a cool little trick that I kind of picked up along the way. I use it to focus on mostly on light, but again, yeah, you could use this to kind of figure out texture. It's another cool way to figure out your light setup, or even, like I said, texture, without having to mess around and wrestle with your painting, you know, because to jump right into your, like what I'm doing here, and start exploring and figuring stuff out on your actual painting, that could take you hours and hours and hours, you know. Whereas with the sphere study, you could quickly figure out, okay, I don't like that light, that's too strong of a light, or I don't like that color, or you know, that kind of thing. So great question. Lots of benefits to using those sphere studies. And again, my course with Domestika, I really dive in, you know, I dive in much deeper, and I kind of explain that process and how I kind of do these sphere studies from start to finish. So here I'm just kind of finishing up, but great question, great question. Here I'm just finishing up, let's see, figuring out just kind of, again, where the shadows land and where everything's at. When I get this far, like this is far enough, especially if I'm not trying to do something super, super polished, I take my sketch layer and I start to bring it down some. Almost to the point where I know that it's there, I kind of see where the lines are, but I want to start thinking more about paint and less about the lines. So I bring it down like that, where again, I don't lose everything. I still have a little bit of a guide. So I'm not just blindly kind of doing this, but it gives me enough. So at this point, I've got a good amount of stuff blocked in and figured out. I'm going to, let's see, just want to drop in a little bit more in here. So again, if you see, I said we're going to start off with color and values. And that's again, because it kind of goes hand in hand when especially when you're painting with color immediately versus painting in black and white. And for those of you, I mentioned that technique about painting in black and white and then in color. I feel like a lot of people are aware of that. Some people are not. So I just duplicated this. I just want to show you real quick what I mean. So if this is black and white, you know, say if I just painted all of this using just grays, just using all my grays, doing my black, you know, doing the lights and the color and the shadows, I can then set a layer over top of it and change this to color. And then I could flip it there. And then once you go over the whole thing, so you won't lose, you'll still have the variation of, what do you call it, of like your lights and darks. You'll have the value variation in there. But what I don't like about this is, and again, there's people that do this and do it really, really well. So I'm sure there's probably other tips and tricks and ways around it that are very beneficial. But what I don't like too much about it is just that you don't have the variation of like cool and warm and, you know, you see the temperature variation. So you still, even if you do this, it's fine, but you still have to kind of go in and figure out and change the temperature. So again, there's no right or wrong way. There's a lot of people that do awesome stuff and they do it that way. But I did used to use that technique a couple years back, or not that long ago, but yeah, I've been in a phase where I kind of like going straight on with the paint, with color.
Hey, Joel.
Yeah.
So the audience loves your color palettes, and they have questions about what you do to come up with your color palettes.
Cool. All right. Yeah. Great question. As far as my color palette, it all depends on what I'm doing. So for example, with Snoopy, you know, I knew that I didn't want to veer off too much from what he really looked like. Sorry, guys. I'm sorry, guys. Just bear with me. I'm going to make sure that no more alarms go off here.
It's home office life.
Yeah. All right. Am I still connected? Can everyone see me well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. So back to the color palette. So with Snoopy, I knew I didn't want to veer off too much because I wanted this to be recognizable somewhat. So for this, I would just kind of look up his doghouse and what that looks like. And, you know, it's obviously red. But then from there, I might kind of change it up a little bit to make it my own. In this case, I am going to keep it red, but I love vintage stuff. So you're asking, where do I get my ideas for color palettes? A lot of my work does have like this kind of warm quality to it, and a lot of browns, a lot of like kind of like that family. But when you're working, for example, I work for a gaming studio. Uh, you know, it's not just my preference all the time. So depending on what the project is, I look for inspiration for color palettes, not just from other like pieces of art. I know a lot of us, we use, what do you call it? Uh, Pinterest or ArtStation, which is great. They're great resources, but try to think outside of that as well. Try to think about inspiration beyond that, because everybody goes there. And so one of the things that I like to do is, even I'll look at fashion even, or I'll look at interior design. So I'll look at interior design color palettes, and what I'm trying to find is an interesting, appealing color combination is all I'm trying to do. So whether that comes from, again, fashion design or interior design, anything else, you know, I'll find some inspiration through that. And that kind of helps me think, because sometimes you'll find a cool color palette that another artist is using for some illustration. And sometimes it's kind of hard to not look at the actual design. So yeah, you're looking at the color palette, but you're also looking at the design. You're kind of distracted by their line work, by so many other things. And so when I'm thinking about color palettes, I'm just trying to think about just the color combinations themselves. So that's one way, you know. And again, just in regards to inspiration in general, I feel like inspiration overall can come from music. It could come from so many different places. So but for the most part, yeah, if I'm doing research, and so again, going back to this here, I would look at Charlie Brown and kind of Snoopy comics and things like that, and look at their palettes. And even if I change the design, for example, his house doesn't look like this, I wanted to kind of give it a rough and kind of industrial vibe to it. The fact that it's the same color palette starts to kind of feel familiar. So when people see it, it kind of feels, it feels familiar, it has that kind of quality to it. All right, so I'm gonna jump onto Snoopy up top. I don't want to get too hung up on details with the house without getting this guy a little bit further along. So again, thinking about what I don't have for Snoopy is, I'm gonna kind of have to do it off the cuff here, is I don't have a sphere painted for him. So, which is a good thing to kind of mention now is, it is beneficial, it is helpful. I don't necessarily have a sphere for every single thing in my scene, but definitely for my main elements, you know, something like for Snoopy, you know, because he's got clothes, he's wearing different, he's got some different like accessories. I'm not gonna have a sphere for every single little thing, but maybe for his body, you know, just to kind of keep in mind where the light is hitting.
Yeah, well, Anthony Marabella was asking that question, like, how many spheres do you use per picture? Do you have one for each element? I guess you just answered that, but for this one, for instance, you need another one for Snoopy?
Yeah, that's it's a good question. It just depends. I usually have it for stuff that I feel like that's important to the scene. So for example, the house is a very, very important part of the scene. For Snoopy, it would be more of like for guide, like for me to kind of, again, keep in mind, like, okay, this is what's going to be in light. This is what's going to be in shadow. So it's kind of that way, because you don't want to, and again, it's a preference. It's a preference of mine. So you might hear another artist speak differently on it. But I don't really need like a sphere for the glasses, for the goggles, for the mask, for, you know, it's mostly just a guide to keep you kind of aware. Because once you get into painting, a lot of times you could you know, you get carried away like with little details and stuff. It's easy to do that, and then you lose sight of like the overall importance, which is everything, are all my lights kind of going in the right direction? Are all my shadows also kind of making sense? So that kind of thing. But yeah, I think it's all, there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's but for the most part, I would say I probably have like 2 or 3 spheres, depending on how many elements I have in the scene. So there, I'm just bringing him down. I think I want for his, for his scarf, I want some sort of a green color. And
Do
you
you
know
use a
what?
particular level of opacity and pressure for your brush, Joel?
I'm sorry, ask, what's that again?
Do you use a particular level of opacity and pressure for your brush?
For, I don't ever change the opacity, but if you guys take a look up here, the opacity is always at 100. But my flow is what I change, depending on the brush. Right now, because I just want to fill, I just want to get a solid fill color in here, I have this set up to 75. I'll even take it all the way up to 100 because I'm not going to blend anything. I just want to fill the scarf in, you know? So if I'm just doing like a filling in some like solid colors, then I'll bring that up to, 100. Here with the goggles as well, I'll keep it at 100 just to kind of fill in those shapes quickly. But when I'm painting, you know, when I'm actually blending and painting, like with what you saw me doing with the house down there, then I have it set to, let's see, I like to paint with this hard round brush, and I have my flow set to about 30 something. And then I do turn this on, which it just uses the, it says always use pressure for opacity. So as my pen pressure goes down, it uses that. I like to kind of build up my colors. So I don't like to kind of throw them down at 100% right away. I like to kind of build up those colors, build up the highlights and shadows. So, and again, it's just my kind of preference in the way that I paint. So now I'm just gonna add some shadows under here. And then I think that if the light is coming from up top, I feel like, especially since his head is, he's got a big head, I feel like a lot of this will be sitting in some shadow. And then maybe this scarf might cast a little shadow there on his back. And then let's see, he's got his little spots. A lot of times I don't, so you see here, like he's got the black spots, right? I don't like to go with 100% black. So I'll bring this down as far down as I can to get a nice dark, rich color. It'll feel black, but it's not 100%. And again, that's just like a thing that I learned through traditional painting. And so it's just kind of stuck with me. I'm not saying that you have to do that. Again, I'm just kind of sharing my process and the way I do it. So there's that nose, which is the same color of his spot. And I think he has, and I don't know if it's the line work that you see in the comics, but I feel like he's got some, I don't know. I don't like the way that looks. I feel like he had a spot or something there. I might have just misread the lines, but I'm gonna leave that the way it is. All right, so now back up to the goggles up here. Because of the background, or I'm just imagining him being outside, I'm gonna go, these are glass. So this is all kind of transparent. And this kind of mimics the sky a little bit. And that's a very warm and light blue. And then here I'm gonna go with a cooler, darker blue. Just hit under
Well,
here. Yeah.
Carlos Arrocha wants to know if you apply the cool light the same way that the natural light.
Yes. I mean, well, I guess if I'm understanding the question correctly, you,
Or cold light, not
yeah,
necessarily.
the same way that I apply the warm light. Um, it's gonna be, so if you look at the easiest way to explain that is like, if you look at this sphere, my key light is this warm light. That's the main light that's hitting this ball. So I have the light up here, and then, you know, I've got this shadow here, and then past the shadow is where I have the cool light. This cool light in this light setup, this shouldn't be, this shouldn't be as bright as the light areas here, like these light areas. This should, this should read as a light, but in other words, what I don't want to do, and again, it's based off of my current light setup here. What I don't want is, I don't want this here. I don't want this to be a super bright light. Now, I'm not saying that that's wrong, because depending on how you're lighting your scene, how you're lighting the character, that could very well work great. But with this simple setup where I just have this one light, and then this is kind of picking up light from like ambient light from the scene, I'm keeping this feels like a highlight, but this shouldn't feel as strong and overpowering as this does. But again, it's not a one size fits all. It just depends on what your setup is like. So I don't know. I hope, hopefully that I answered that question.
Thank you.
Cool. So now, you know, I haven't introduced too much texture yet, but I'm gonna do that in just a second. I'm not spending a lot of time with light yet, but I just want to be, I just want to be aware of and continue to remind myself of where that direction is coming from. So, and now that, and he asked about that cool light. So here I'm gonna have a little bit of cool light on this side. And again, that's the fun thing about lighting, is that you could, I don't know if anyone's asked about this yet, but you look at photos and you look at movies, you just look at all these different like light setups, and a lot of times my inspiration for a painting comes from a cool photograph that just has really, really cool lighting, where you're just like, oh, I would have never thought to, you know, accentuate that or to light something a certain way. And so sometimes even just the way somebody photographed a model, you know, and the lighting just looks so cool, that could inspire a new piece. So even though I'm not painting an exact replica of what that photographer photographed, you know, just the light setup is what I use for inspiration. But then I'll paint something completely different using that same light setup, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing your little tips.
Cool. All right, so I think that's good. I'm gonna go back down here and I'm gonna start painting in some of the texture. I didn't spend a whole lot of time, but if you see here, I do have some of the grain. So I'm gonna try to put this, I'm gonna bump up my flow to about 60. And I'm just gonna kind of paint in, it's kind of scribbles, you know, again, just for the sake of time. But I like to do this. I like to get this kind of the texture in early on. Sometimes I'll add a little bit of noise too. And I'll show you what that is in just a second. I don't know that I would do it for this piece, but just for the sake of the demo. So what I did here for these lines for the wood grain is I just color picked from this shadow area down here, and I painted those in. So for this side, this cool side, I'm gonna color pick from here, and I'm gonna do the same thing. And again, not really spending too much time with it, but just to get the idea across. You also, you know what? I say that because I don't want to spend too much time on it and make it pretty, but you know what? With stuff like texture, you really don't want to sit there and noodle around with it too much and try to get it all perfect, because then it's gonna feel stiff. A lot of times it is just with the, you know, quick brush strokes, as Bob Ross likes to call happy accidents. That is a real thing. I believe, I wholeheartedly believe. So see, I'm just kind of painting that in. In here, I want to do this. You know what? I'm going to leave that for later. Let me show you guys what I meant about noise. Sometimes I do add noise. And I don't know that I would necessarily do that here, but I just duplicated my layer in case I don't like it. And this is improvised. And then I'll go in here to noise, add noise, and then it's very subtle, so you won't be able to see it off of here, but if you're looking at my screen, you could see some noise. I'm gonna bump it up, that's too much. And let's see, uniform. So that's too much, but I'll bring it down a little bit. And it just gives it a little bit of texture, a little bit of, it doesn't feel flat, you know? And again, this is just my style, my, like, you know, just the look that I like to kind of go for. This is not about being correct or incorrect. If you're not, you know, some people that paint very like simple flat shapes and fills and it looks beautiful. For my style and the way I like to paint, I love texture. So this adds another little, another layer of texture to it. So I like that. I think I'm gonna toggle back and forth. I think I'm gonna leave it in this case. I kind of like that. So I'm gonna merge those two layers. So right now I'm working off of one layer with this house. I could probably, yeah, so see my line work? I could probably turn it off right now. I'm gonna leave it on just because there's one more thing that I wanted to add. And that is let's see here, the star.
Well, sorry to interrupt. We have
Yeah,
a
go
few
for it.
questions regarding your layers. Do you ever have your lights and shadows on individual layers?
Not really. I kind of, if I'm very unsure, if I'm like, you know what, I don't know. For example, if I was painting this and I was like, I don't know if I want to light the house from this way. Maybe I want to light it the other way. Then I'll keep it on two layers on separate layers, sorry, until I figure out like what I want. Uh, Once I know like, okay, this is definitely where I want the light coming. I want it coming from this direction. Then it, like, if I'm unsure about that, about the direction of the light, I'll keep that on separate layers. But otherwise it's all on one. And you know what? I just noticed, guys, here as I'm painting this in, I should have added the noise after doing this here, because now this is going to be flat. It's not going to have the same texture. But so in the with a real, if I wanted to take this to a final finish, I would have gone back and redone that part. But for the sake of time, I'm just going to kind of keep moving. But yeah, I don't keep them on separate layers. Another thing that another reason why I might keep it on a separate layer is, again, for work, like for actual work. You know, if I'm painting something and I'm thinking that my art director or my lead guy might have a different opinion on my staging of the light or something, if I feel like it's a very important part to the scene, then I'll keep that separate so that if the revisions come, it's easy for me to kind of change them. But so again, see, it kind of depends on what you're doing. If it's for client work, then yeah, I try to keep certain things layered. If I feel like, hey, if they come back and they have changes, it's going to be a nightmare to do this all over again. So I might keep it on a separate layer. But otherwise, for my own stuff, and if I know what I'm doing, if I know exactly what I want to do, whether it's with light or texture or anything like that, a lot of times I don't really use a whole bunch of layers. I feel like there's definitely I'm spending too much time with this little guy here, so I'm gonna move on. I think there's an advantage to being able to use a bunch of different layers in Photoshop, but I think also the disadvantage to it is that you will spend, you know, just you'll spend an insane amount of time noodling around with layers and stuff, and not making a decision. Whereas when you paint everything and you're just kind of going for it, then you know you kind of have to live with the decisions that you've made and the brushstrokes that you've thrown down. Um, so all right, that's cool. You know, again, I might spend more time really making this feel more realistic, but for the most part, right here, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna add, thinking about these as being like different boards that are kind of overlapping each other. I'm adding like little creases in here, which is, this has to do with like the occlusion. And the occlusion is like where you're not gonna have any light. Like there's no light hitting there. So that's gonna be really, really dark. And you don't wanna overdo this. If you notice, I'm not doing a perfect outline around every little, I'm just kind of hitting certain spots. I'm just hitting a couple spots here and there. I might hit like right underneath this nail, these nails. And then I think I might even darken this a little bit.
Hey, Joel, do you ever use layer blending mode?
Layer blending, yes, I do. I do use that. And you know what? I think now that you guys asked, I think I will use it here. Let me see if I can find a spot for it here so that I can do just show an example of that, of how I might use it. And just to be, just to like address what I mentioned earlier about the noise. Yeah, I definitely would have added the noise like much later, because I'm doing a lot of painting right now and I'm painting over a lot of that noise. So I would have done that much later in the process. But you know what? We're freestyling a little bit here, so that's okay. Also here, where this is all sitting in shadows, I think these parts that are facing down might be a little bit darker than these parts here. So these parts here that are facing down, I think I might go a little bit darker. Because again, the light is coming from this direction. From the right. And all right, so before I do the blending mode thing, let me just, I think I wanted to add in my sketch, I think I had another little piece of wood that was kind of sticking out here. Something like that. Give it a shadow. And then maybe underneath. All right, I don't want to miss that question, so let me just jump onto that. So the way I would use blending mode is, let's see, let me flatten this. So I have this new layer here over the house, and I'm gonna change that to overlay. And so what I want to do there is, even though this is all sitting in shadow, I think, and I hope this works. We'll see. Even though this is all sitting in shadow, sometimes it's kind of cool when you add a little bit of like bounce light. And this would only work depending on what the color of the floor is. Depending on what color the floor is, the light might hit the floor, bounce, and then you might get some bounce light up in here in these areas. So just for the sake of the demo, let's say that is happening. I'm gonna go with a lighter, so that whatever the color of the house is or wherever I'm gonna paint, I'm gonna go lighter. And in this case, I'm gonna add more yellow. So somewhere around here, let's see if that works. And maybe that's too heavy. So I'm gonna change this 62 down to, I'm gonna change it to 19. Let's see. So I do that to like, and this kind of stuff, changing my blending mode this way, this is for like at the very end, once I've kind of figured everything out. So I might do something like that where some of the light is kind of bouncing in. I might use that same technique. So using that same overlay layer, I'm gonna use this here. Let me see if that works here. No, because it's on Snoopy, sorry. I gotta create a new layer over Snoopy, change it to overlay. And so it doesn't change. It's kind of hard to tell here because it's so simple. There's not a lot of stuff going on, but it's a cool way to add like a highlight to something without messing up what you already have. Like say if I wanted to go even stronger on these highlights, say if I, on the house, if I feel like, you know, I wanted to go even brighter. If this is set to overlay, if my layer is set to overlay, once I paint now, make this like, it's like an orangey color. Let's see if this works. Doesn't show up as much. I guess I'd have to plan for it a little bit better, but the point is that if you set it to overlay and you start to paint over, this is a nice way to kind of get to bump up your highlights if you feel that you needed to do that. So if I do that, and let me see if I turn that on and off. Yeah, so it does make a difference. And so sometimes I'll use it that way. Sometimes I'll use it for, I'm not gonna use that here, but sometimes I'll use it to multiply. If I wanna get like really, really dark colors, I'll select my dark shadowy color here. And then say if I want the inside of this house, like just this top part might not be getting a whole lot of light. I'll use multiply, and multiply, you know, I won't lose too much of that texture, but it'll darken that color a bit. And that looks kind of cool, so I'll leave that. I'm gonna flatten that. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and let me just kind of go into like my shadows to kind of wrap this up, and then I can move on to Snoopy and finish him up. So again, I'm just gonna kind of, wherever I feel that the shadows are gonna be like the darkest, which is whatever is like the light is not really hitting this area. And as you get close to little edges like this, you do wanna have some occlusion like that, where you have really, really dark, tight spots. I think in here, I kind of want to go darker. And so this is the thing about painting. This is why painting is, you know, it is tough. Painting is hard because you're thinking about light, you're thinking about texture, you're thinking about values, you're thinking about all these things with every brush stroke that you put down. So there, I just wanted to do that. Here, I think I want to bring in some shadows here.
Can you remind us, Joel, what brush you're using to paint? It has a really organic feel that people like.
Yeah, this one here that I'm using, I've used it for most of this, is it's by Loish, Loish. And if you just type into Google like Loish Gumroad brushes, it'll come up right away. She's got some really cool brushes. So it's this one, the hard round brush. And the difference between that one, I used two of them. So I just created a new layer here so you can see. This one has like a really soft edge. Very easy for blending, but you could still get some very nice texture. And then this one here has a harder edge. So this one feels a little bit chalky.
That's a question, Joel, that came earlier from Arturo, because he says, how can he avoid his hard edges? His illustrations tend to be a little flat. Is that what you would recommend, that he use a soft brush like that?
Yeah, if he's talking about flat in terms of color and or in terms of his values, like his shading is what some people will describe it as, then yeah, it's just a matter of practicing, you know, and again, with these sphere studies, practicing your light, your dark, and how to blend those in. If it's too flat, like if you're not getting the colors to blend, having the right brush where you don't really have to go in and play with all the brush settings and everything is the best bet. So I like her brushes. There's some other artists too that I've used their brushes, but for the most part, Lowish, you install them and you upload them and add them to your brush set in Photoshop, and then you're good to go. Like I said before, I change my flow a little bit. So depending on which brush I'm using, you know, I'll change this around, but for the most part, I keep it around 30 something. And if you're getting those flat, like if you're not able to blend easily, a lot of times, yeah, it is because, you know, your flow might be at 100%. And so when it's at 100%, you're spitting out 100% paint, and it's almost impossible to blend your colors. So up here, I'm gonna add just a little bit of light right there. And then here, I know I said already, like, I'm gonna move on to Snoopy, but this is just fun, this is the fun part. Once I figured out like all of my darks, everything is all kind of figured out, the detailing part is super fun. But again, for the sake of time, I shouldn't be spending too much time on this. Let me move on. Let me give this, before I forget, a highlight here. And because this is metal, and this has like an edge, it's a metal, it's supposed to be like a screw. A lot of times I add my highlight right on the rim of that edge, like right here. Like that, and then I leave this dark underneath to give it that dimension, to have it feel like it's actually raised. All right, so that's that. I'm gonna move on to him. I'm gonna delete that guy. And then here, you know, I might have spent a little bit more time giving this a little bit more texture and shape, but let's just try to get this looking like something, like an actual mask. I don't want to go too thick with this shadow, because if it's too thick, then it's gonna look like, I just want it to be thin. I want it to be like stitching, kind of. Looks like I screwed this up here a little bit, this color, so I'm gonna fix that. And then, all right, so that's the light area. I'm gonna bump up, because this is like leather. So see the way here, before I create that white, before I create this like really hard white line, there's still a little bit of light area around it. So that's what I'm kind of doing here. So the light is really hitting. When I go from a dark color to my light color here, in between, let's see, if you look at my, can I make this bigger? No, I can't. Yeah, I can. So here's my shadow color, and then here's my light. My shadow color actually should be cooler. I feel like the shadow color should be a cooler color, because my light is a warm color. So something like that. And then in between, I like to have more saturation between the two colors, and then blend. Again, I'm not gonna spend too much time with that, but now that I figured this out here, I've got some shadow, I've got some lights, then I color pick from the shadow areas to kind of add these little details. So there's a stitching there. This is some sort of stitching as well. Then up here, because this edge up here is facing the light, I'm gonna use a highlight color. I'm gonna go a little bit brighter, especially so you guys can see it. So something like that. Then he might have another highlight color up here. This might have some little highlights in there. And I think I might want to add another edge there, something like that. And then here, let's see. This is supposed to be kind of reflective metal. So I think I want to have some of Snoopy's color, not too much. You don't want it to be too much. But I think I want some of his color kind of bouncing up on this.
Well, quick question.
Yeah.
From Simona. Do you ever zoom in and paint? In her drawing, she feels like she's adding a lot of details that are not even visible to people in the overall picture. She's asking you, do you ever zoom in and paint?
You know, I used to, and then I heard like some artists saying, "Oh, don't do that," and then I was like, whatever. I like that artist, and so I'll just do what he said. He said, "Don't do it." I won't do it. But I didn't really catch why he was saying not to do it. And then I finally, in a separate video, I heard another artist talking, explaining why not to do that. And I'll explain now in a second. That's a really good question, actually, because you know what? It reminded me about this navigator box. So this navigator here in my panel, I like to keep this open because, let me hide this, okay. Because, and let me hide this other stuff. Because this is a quick little preview of what the image is starting to look like. And I can see that the cracks, like all of these little details are reading well, but they're not like overpowering or too messy or anything. It's good to not zoom in. So your question is, do you ever zoom in? Like, do I ever zoom in like this? I have done this if it's absolutely necessary, if I'm really trying to get something, but I try as quick as possible to then zoom back out. Because when you zoom in, when you work like that, like so zoomed into your canvas, you start to forget about the overall picture, the overall image. And you like zoom into a nose and you're like, oh, this nose is looking so cool. And then before you know it, it's like super detailed nose and everything else. Like there's almost too much detail on that edge. And it just doesn't feel right with the rest of the image. So number one, when you zoom in, you lose sight of your overall composition. And number two, when you zoom in, you end up spending like an hour in one tiny little area. So again, like everything else, sometimes it's okay to do it, sometimes it's not. But again, the reason behind it is if you really need to like zoom in because it's a like these stitching, like if you wanted to get in and just make sure that you weren't painting over some of the other details, then fine. But try not to spend too much time zoomed in. Try to like go back out. You want to try as much as possible to paint like this, kind of zoomed out, seeing the whole image. It helps you, like right now I'm doing a demo, so you know, I'm not really too nervous or anything, but I feel like if I was doing a 30-minute, like super quick painting just for myself and I didn't care, you know, with something like that, I would be zoomed out the entire time. I wouldn't zoom in at all. Because again, I'm just kind of moving around the whole image, trying to paint everything all at the same time so that it all kind of matches and fits right. So let's see. Cool. So let's see. Now up here, because this is, again, chrome, I feel like that would be very reflective. Or it's not chrome, sorry, it's metal. So I'm gonna go with a really cool color, yellow. And I'm gonna hit this up here. So we're gonna do that. And then I'm gonna take white. I'm gonna bump up my flow to like 80 something. And then like I was showing you here with the little nail, with these little edges, I'm gonna do the same thing up here, right around that edge.
Well, how did you manage to get rid of the line work sketch without having your border soft? Do you mask the sketch?
I do, yeah. Like how did I manage to, I'm sorry, how did I manage
To get rid of the line work.
to get rid of the
Without,
line work? What I do is that as I get further and further along, you know, when I first get started, it's like, you know, it's like this here. As I get further along, I keep bringing it down, the opacity of my sketch. So my sketch is on a separate layer. So I keep bringing that down, until I don't really need it anymore.
thank you, that's awesome. Thanks for showing it.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. This is starting to look like metal. I would spend a lot more time with this and maybe get some other like reflections on there. But for the most part, again, that's just like, I might add an attachment metal piece here, like a hinge, to make it look a little bit more realistic. But, you know, just to kind of keep it moving. And for the sake of time, let me just move on here to the scarf. And
Well, do you ever
then
overlay photos for texture?
I
Or just,
do some, yes.
okay.
Yeah, I love that you guys are asking awesome questions, because you're asking things that actually are part of my process. So depending on, you know, what I'm doing, sometimes I'll need that, you know, or sometimes I'll just kind of, it's a preference. For example, with this broken wood on the house, like, and these multi-layers to it, or for the texture, for the grain, I might bring in a photographic image and paste it over top of this. And I might set it to like multiply, I might brush some parts out. And a lot of times I might use it for the actual texture. Other times I might just use it as a guide. You know, I'll lower the opacity or I'll set it to multiply. And I'll use it as a guide, and then I'll just kind of paint in the grain over that. Like I'll use that as a guide, you know, to kind of mimic that texture. So I'll either use the actual image itself for the texture, or I'll use it just as a guide so I can manually paint in the texture. So let's see. I'm gonna now add in some darks under here, and then let's get to Snoopy's actual fur. So I'm gonna bump up the shadow color under here. I might end up having to bring back that or repaint that cool light on that side. And then here, and because this is fur, and because I want to actually try to capture a little bit of that roughness, I'm not gonna perfectly blend in everything. I'm gonna kind of smudge. I'm gonna kind of smudge all of that, because in a way it kind of, you know, helps it kind of feel like fur. And I learned this really cool trick. You know, I think I might do that now here. Because this isn't my trick, but I learned it from another artist. And it's a really cool tip where I'm gonna flatten this. So now Snoopy is all on one layer. And what I do here is select this brush that I created. And the brush is just a bunch of dots like this. Just a bunch of dots like this. And then I use the Smudge Tool. And let's see, and I set the strength, put it on like 70, 74. That should work. And let's see if this works. Hopefully this will work. Oh, sorry, I'm using the brush, not the smudge. Okay, there you go. It's kind of hard to see it, but, and you have to kind of have a good foundation put down for it before you
I
start
see.
doing all of this. But yeah, you start to do this kind of stuff and it gives you a really nice texture, and you do it on the edge here. I'm gonna zoom in even more. If you do it on the edge, it really starts to look like fur. So, and again, this is a preference. Like, if I don't know if I want him to look so fuzzy like this, but you know, it's just another little cool thing. Now, you know, before I do all of that, I would go in and add more detail, because the more detail, more foundation you have there before you start doing effects like that, the better and more realistic it's gonna feel. So anyway, it's just a cool little trick. And in my Domestica course, I just kind of go into explaining how you would create a brush like that. I'm gonna just kind of smudge all of that out a little bit and maybe leave some of it. I think I went kind of
So
heavy.
you told us how you always keep your side view just to keep your perspective. There, our followers are also asking if you ever do anything like a flip horizontal or rotate to change perspective and make sure that everything is reading well.
Yes, yeah, that is a really good habit to get into. I usually set up a shortcut, and I don't have it set up in this workspace right now because I recently changed my workspace. But yeah, you could just set up like a Photoshop shortcut and have a shortcut to kind of like quickly toggle and see that. That is a very, very good habit to get into, because for those who, or for whoever asked, you've probably heard that when you do that, when you flip the image horizontally, you'll catch little things that might be off that you weren't noticing. And it's weird how that works, but it's definitely very useful. And I would agree that, again, not only is it a good habit to get into, but I feel like a lot of the pros definitely do that as well, include that in their process.
So that fur brush is a brush you created, right?
Yeah, it's just a brush I created. It's very, very easy. It's just a custom brush. Um, and you literally just create a new canvas. You you just brush a bunch of dots onto it, and then go define brush and uh, create a new brush. It's like not even 5 minutes to create that brush. But it's a really, really cool way to, again, just to add a little bit of texture to it. And like everything else, guys, subtlety is key. A lot of times we find like a cool brush, um, and then you just use it for like everything. Like when I discovered a really cool brush that was really good for Freckles, I wanted to put Freckles on everybody that I painted. I just wanted to go to town with that. And it's fine, it's cool. Again, that's what they're there for. But you always just want to use them. Again, subtlety is key. At this point, I'm going to turn off this sketch layer. I don't think I need it. It's kind of confusing me a little bit with the smaller details. So his nose, I think I could spend a little bit more time on it. But basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get like a light plane up here, a little bit of shadow, darker underneath, darker definitely within the nostrils, maybe a little bit of light there. Not the prettiest nose. I would probably spend more time and fix that, but. And then here, just give it a highlight. So you see the way this by itself already feels like a good enough highlight, but sometimes I'll take this rough edge brush and I'll bring it all the way up to white. And then very small up here, I'll add this, what you call the specular highlight. And then just adding that, it just kind of takes it just to an even higher level of finish. So this kind of texture and this kind of brushing that I did for his face is what I would do for the rest of his body. Let's create a new layer, drop it in. I'm gonna try to see if I can breeze through this so that we can bring this to an end. I think I might switch back to this brush actually. And bigger brush. That's another thing. I keep my brush pretty, it's not until I get to like detail, like super fine details that I minimize the size of my brush. So I keep it pretty big. I try to keep it as big as possible. Like see here, the size of his arm and then the size of my brush is a lot bigger. I try to keep it at a good size. I feel like, again, you worry less about the teeny tiny little details and you focus more on the bigger shapes and that kind of stuff.
Do you use any special brushes for blending the colors?
No, it's all the same brush. It's all the same. It's all this same brush, this same hard round brush. The only thing that I'm changing is this flow up here. And like right now, I mean, look at that. That's up at like 87%, you know, and I was still able to blend with it. So yeah, no, I don't. The only reason why I would change a brush is if I want like a different texture. So for example, with this spot, like if I want it to feel a little bit rougher so that it feels a little bit more like fur, I would change, sorry, I went kind of quick there. I would change to this oil pastel brush. And then now watch, let me zoom in a little bit. So now, as I paint that edge, it's a little bit, and let me zoom in even more. It's a little bit more rough. You know what, I kind of started a little bit before. Let me do that over again. I know you guys probably did see it, but so now with this rough edge brush, if you were doing, let's say if you were painting a car and you were gonna add a sticker to that car, like a race car, you probably won't want this brush because you don't want this rough edge. It should be a crisp, smooth, you know, edge. With something like fur and he's a dog, you know, that spot, you might want something like this. You might want something that's a little bit more organic like this. And then I'll go in and I'll blend it a little bit, but I leave some of that roughness in there. So again, it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. What is it that you're painting, you know? So something like that. Then I want to add a little bit of light up here, although this back part should be in shadow. So something like that. And then here, even though this looks white almost, you can see that I can still push that even more. And using this fuzzy brush, you know, again, it's not like hyper realistic or anything like that, but it does give it that right texture, you know, that appropriate texture for the material, which is fur, you know. And so I'm just gonna kind of hit some of those areas, maybe hit the top of this. Maybe there's a little bit of shadow underneath. And let's see. I have this gray color behind to help me see some of the things that I might have missed. Looks kind of cool with the gray, but whatever, we'll keep it this color for now. I think I'm gonna bring in some of this lighter color here. Looks like we're past the hour. How are we doing on time?
Well, we enjoy watching you so much that we're doing
Okay.
great. So,
Okay,
uh,
cool, cool.
guys, what do you think? Tell us in the chat. Do you want to watch Joel continue? Do you want us to wrap up? We're in quarantine, Joel, so I don't
Yeah.
know.
There's nowhere to go, guys.
Please continue as long as you need. We do have a couple of questions here that I want to ask you, but it's really up to you, Joel. We're here to
Yeah.
watch you.
Cool, cool. And if you have questions, then go right ahead. Because, yeah, I'm just here kind of, at this point, I'm just going to kind of finesse a little bit, touch up some little areas, but I can definitely answer more questions if you have them.
Let's talk a little bit about color theory. Does warm light always create cool shadows, or is it only in daylight situations? Somebody's asking here. Do you know?
Yeah, you know, the way, and again, I might be wrong on this, but the way when I paint, when I'm painting, I'm pretty much anytime that I have a warm light source, then my shadows are cool. Uh, so, but also depending on how close my light source is to that object, all of those kind of things do, and you know, they do affect the intensity of the light. Um, but as far as like warm light, cool shadows, yeah, I kind of use that theory for the most part. And whether it's like sunlight or you know, I guess you would call it like studio light or something. Uh, especially because, especially you know, something like this, I'm using, for example, like the reflection in his goggles and stuff. That could be outdoor. That could be something like that. But I'm not really painting a background here. But the way that I'm painting him, it's as if, in a sense, it is almost like if he was outside. So yeah, I guess that's another way of just kind of explaining that. Yeah, I do use warm light, cool shadows, and vice versa. I try not to exaggerate it so much, though. I try not to make it like, oh, yellow, golden yellow kind of lighting. So then super bright cyan, like uh, cool light or super cool shadows. That's more of a preference. That's more of a style, you know, that's your decision. But I try not to kind of exaggerate them too much. And again, that's more of a preference thing on my end. And you know what? With that being said, I'm sure that if you went through my Instagram, you might find where maybe I did do that. So I feel like with a lot of questions, you know, there's not many answers where it's like, yes, definitely this all the time. Uh, but in regards to that, I would say that most of the time I am following that. Yes, I am following that rule or that theory, I guess I should call it. And down here, I'm just
Well, how
adding.
long have you been painting digitally? You're so confident with color. How long have you been doing it now?
Painting digitally, I've been doing it since, man, it's been about maybe. Well, let me preface it by saying, not painting in general, but painting specifically digitally. I've been painting about maybe 6 years, 6 or 7 years, something like that. Uh, but I always considered myself, I started drawing and painting when I was about 11, 12, uh, watching Bob Ross. I had like all the Bob Ross books. You know, I thought he was the greatest painter ever until I realized that, like, you know, a lot of people didn't take him serious. But anyways, I always considered myself to be more of a painter than a craftsman, like an artist, than I'm sorry, a drawer, I guess some people will say. Uh, I always felt stronger with a paintbrush than I did with a pencil. You know, I see these beautiful like ink drawings and stuff, and my hand is not that steady. I love that with paint, it's just more organic and you're just kind of throwing stuff down, which is probably why my stuff feels painterly, because I like the looseness of it. So, but yeah, sorry, that's a long answer to an easy question. Um, but yeah, it's been about like 6 or 7 years painting digitally. But guys, I have always, since the very beginning, I have always used Wacom products. So, and that's not, I'm not brown nosing here. It really is the truth. I love their tablets. I've never, anytime, if I ever used one, a different brand, I could tell you it definitely wasn't mine. And I just love these tablets. And so people will ask me, and I'll just be honest. People will say, like, does it have to be that? And I'm always like, I try to tell them the truth. Like, no, it absolutely doesn't absolutely have to be. But like, I could only speak on the products that I use. And I will say, I'm not gonna use any names, but I will say that I do have friends that have bought other brands and then not been happy with it. Whereas with me, I've used the Cintiq, I've used the Intuos, I've used even the bamboo. I remember the bamboo, like, and I've always loved these products. So, sorry, I just wanted to add that in there because I really am passionate about this brand.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, for those of you wondering, Joel is working on a Cintiq Pro and he is using Photoshop. Well, is there any other painting softwares that you recommend, that you love?
You know, I've used, and I don't know if it's even, I think it's actually free now, but uh, what is it called? Sketchbook Pro. I used to use that to sketch. I used to actually do all my sketch work in there and then bring it into Photoshop. And I think that that's free now, to be honest. It's by Autodesk. I think it's by Autodesk, or at least it was at one point. Um, I haven't really used any others. I used to use also Corel Painter. I think I started to learn how to paint digitally. Actually, I think when I was taking like tutorials and like watching tutorials, I think I learned off of Corel um, Painter. And again, I don't know if that's even a thing anymore, but
Yes, Corel Painter is a thing. It's excellent.
people still use it. Okay, cool. Sorry, I haven't used it in years. Um, And then aside from that, I don't use this myself, but I'm hoping to get an iPad Pro this year and Procreate. I mean, I have a lot of friends that use it, and wow, like the stuff that you can do with that is just absolutely incredible. And so some people that have been wanting to take my course that I have with Domestika have asked, hey, I have Procreate, I have an iPad, like can I take your course with that? And I'm like, yeah, it's specific to Photoshop, but go for it. And people have done really, really good stuff, like cool stuff with it. So that's another powerful program. Again, I don't use it, but I have friends that do, and they do some really, really awesome stuff.
For beginners, for beginners, do you have any recommendation for a tablet? I know that now you're working on a Cintiq, but Natalia Castro, who's starting out, is wondering, what would you recommend for somebody brand new?
I always tell people that uh, while the Cintiqs are more on the pricier side, I always say that if you know for a fact, like, hey, I'm gonna be an illustrator, like there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like I'm definitely going to be using a tablet. A Cintiq is just worth it's so worth the money. I mean, it really is because it feels natural. It feels very natural. Feel like anytime you're drawing on a display, like you're seeing what you're actually the lines that you're putting down, that just feels so much better. However, I do understand that financially it's kind of difficult and sometimes it is hard to make that purchase, especially early on in our career. So with that being said, then I would say that even any one of the tablets, any one of the Wacom tablets that are not display, that are just like the Intuos or something like that, would be fine as well. The thing that I would, because people ask, and some people ask and they have no experience at all with any tablets. So again, all I'm saying is, while that is more affordable, while getting something besides a Cintiq could be more affordable, um, it's gonna take a little bit more time to get used to it because you're drawing down here and you're looking up here, and it takes a little bit of time to get used to that. However, if you've been drawing for quite some time, if you're really passionate about it, it's not a hurdle that you can't get over. I did, and I used one of those for several years before I got my first Cintiq. So if I had to give you like simplest answers, it would be Cintiq. If you can swing it financially, definitely, I feel like you will not be disappointed at all. If you cannot, then I would say any one of those Intuos, like tablets, any one of those tablets that don't have the display, I think you would be fine. If you do get one of those, I do think that with tablet, size does matter. And I think so. I guess it depends on how you draw. I like to draw with big like strokes, you know. If you don't need that, if you don't typically draw that way, like with using big strokes, then you will be fine with one of their smaller tablets. So again, some people do draw like really tight and small spaces, but keep that in mind, because I feel like that's something I didn't really think about when I first got my tablet. When I first started digital painting, and it was kind of hard for me to adjust to that. All right, let's see.
Well, are you working on any new classes with Domestika? Or are you putting out any new coloring tutorials or anything like that?
Yeah, I have a so right now the class that I have with them is digital painting, and it's color and light. It's basically kind of like similar to this demo, but I go into a lot more. The class that I'm working on with them now, I'm working on it as we speak, is a drawing class. So I'm talking more about where my first class was all painting, and we jump right into painting. We do no drawing, no sketching. This other class is going to be, okay, how do you come up with this design? How do you sketch it? Like before you even start painting. So I'm going to talk about design. How do I design my characters? How do I start? How do I come up with the idea? And then I'm going to, put down all the, we're going to put down the sketch work. We're going to do thumbnails. We're going to do final like sketch illustration. So this class will focus more on drawing and sketching and designing the character, whereas the class that I currently have with them is digital painting. So it's kind of cool because they kind of go hand in hand. And so yeah, so I don't know when that one will come out. I'm still working on it, but it should be a lot of fun.
Congratulations, Joel. I watched the Domestika class and I really enjoyed it, and I'm a big fan of their classes too.
Cool. Thank you. All right, and I think that here, I think we're coming to an end here. I think I might add might spend a little bit more time with that, but I think I might add like a couple little scratches. And let's see, maybe a little bit more roughness to this fur here, or to this cotton kind of, or wool. I don't know. Yeah, and then I'm gonna move back down here, guys, and I think we're pretty close to being done. I'm gonna just
Are there any illustrators, Joel, any illustrators you admire that you recommend we follow, or any influences whose work you've been enjoying lately?
Absolutely, yeah. Ryan Lang is one of my favorite artists. I mean, he's just fantastic, really cool, talented guy. And so Ryan Lang, he's on Instagram. Gosh, I don't know about recently. I'm thinking recently. It's so weird because you follow people and then you know them by their handle, but you don't remember or you don't know their names. But Cory Loftus is another artist that I'm very heavily influenced by. I really like his work, his character design. Of course, some of the greats like Norman Rockwell. I really like Norman Rockwell. And then Bobby Chu. Bobby Chu, really big fan of his, and I've taken a lot of schoolism courses with him. So yeah, there's so many guys, there's so many artists out there. But that's just to name a few. Those are some of my favorites that come to mind right away. Oh, Peter Desev. Peter Desev is another one when it comes to designing characters. It's really cool stuff.
And well, did you go to school for art education, or are you self-taught?
I did go to school for, actually, I went to school for graphic design. So I went to school to learn design, and in learning graphic design, that's where I kind of learned the software. So that's where I learned learned how to use Photoshop and the Adobe products. I learned that Photoshop, Illustrator, these other applications. But yeah, I never went to school for like fine art or digital painting or anything like that. That I learned pretty much exclusively online. And I learned that through Schoolism, CGMA, and then some other, like just, some other resources as well. People ask me, one question that I do get asked is like, hey, do you recommend like, uh, you know, tutorials from like YouTube and I always tell people it's fine, especially if you're like, you don't have the money to pay for tutorials or to pay for classes. I always just tell people that those are fine. You do want to be careful with who you're learning from. Again, I know that we all have different ways of doing things, but you just want to be careful not to waste too much time doing something completely wrong. Sometimes it is hard to find, like sometimes you do find really cool stuff on YouTube, but then there's other times where it's hard to find like really good like content on there. So just to be mindful, before, a lot of times what I would do when I would watch stuff on YouTube is, if I go that route to learn stuff, I just kind of look up the artist and see what does their actual portfolio look like. And if they have work that looks like something that I'm like, oh, I kind of want to, I aspire to do stuff like that, then I'll watch his tutorials, I'll watch his stuff. But yeah, most of my training, pretty much all of my digital painting knowledge comes from online resources.
Well,
And so down
beginner classes, because a lot of our followers are asking about that. You offering classes for beginners?
Beginner stuff. Yeah, that's a good, I wish I knew more specifically if anyone has any questions, like specifically, on what, like very beginner, like, hey, which this isn't, I don't mean, being serious, like file open Photoshop, like how do I even get started? Like, is there a big demand for that? Or are people talking about like, no, maybe just more drawing stuff? Like, I just don't know how to even, like, before I even get to painting, like, how do I even make something that I even want to paint? Like, so yeah.
About painting the human face or the body.
Okay.
Yeah, just literally drawing and sketching classes for beginners. Not necessarily like how to install your program, not that level of beginner, but certainly, yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I meant that because you know what, there's people that are like, I don't even know how to use Photoshop, and it's so intimidating, and it's so yeah. I mean, I think that's a very, hey, that's we're all on different levels. If it is for just drawing, like basic drawing skills, yeah, I don't have anything like that right now planned, but that doesn't mean that I won't, or that I won't have one in the future. As of right now, I'm just working on this one, this next class, but who knows, maybe after this is done, maybe I'll do another one. We'll see. It's definitely very useful, and it's, what, that kind of stuff, like learning anatomy, drawing faces, very, very basic fundamental stuff. It's for everybody. I think everybody should be taking stuff like that. I mean, I still take classes like that. Thomas Fluharty is another artist that I really, really like. And I took a very basic drawing class, fundamentals class from him through Schoolism. And it was fantastic, you know? So I would say that even for those of you out there who are more like, slightly more like intermediate pro level, uh, consider taking classes like that, because there's always more to learn, if at the very least to learn somebody else's approach. I think that I have played around enough with this little house. I think it's at a good place. I think I'm gonna stop it there. But yeah, any other questions or anything like that, Elizabeth?
There are quite a few questions that I will be sending you personally, so you can take the time on your Instagram stories and answer a few, because there are some really specific to your workflow that may need more explanation than what we have time for. Thank you guys so much for sending over your questions. I'll be sharing them with Joel. Joel, I'm gonna give you some homework, buddy. You're gonna have some answers.
I welcome them. I welcome them. Yes.
Yes. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. We are at 1 hour and 36 minutes, so we're going to let you go eat some lunch and spend your afternoon. Joel, it has been a pleasure to watch you work and watch you paint. You are a master of light. I love it. And maybe we can do a part 2 later.
Yeah, sounds great. I am always up for it.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen one last time, guys, because I do want you guys to see. Joel, if you don't have anything else to say goodbye to us, because I'm going to switch off the screen.
You know what? Actually, do you mind? I just want to share one, because I made this note as I was thinking about this. So do you mind if I just share one last word with everyone?
Please do.
Yeah. You know, sometimes you think about like, okay, what's a closing thought, or if you could give me any bit of advice, what would that be? And something that this just kind of came to me earlier on today is that a lot of us get hung up on, and I had to write it down here, so I'm looking at my notes, but a lot of us get hung up on talent. You're on social media, you're on Instagram, and you see people like, wow, like that guy's got so much talent, or she's got so much talent. And one thing that we forget is that talent without discipline is like useless. That's how you get, a lot of you have heard the phrase wasted talent. And so that's how that happens, is talent without discipline is like useless. You need discipline to study. You need that to learn. People who are able to learn, who are able to practice, who are able to humble themselves and learn the fundamentals and go back to that. You know, I believe that having strong discipline with little talent, you could still, there's a lot of people that can still find a lot of success with that. But having all the talent in the world and having no discipline, no, like, I'm going to sit down today and I'm going to learn this. I'm going to learn how to draw hands, or I'm going to spend a week doing that. I think that is where you'll start to struggle a lot. So again, don't let like all this talent, all this stuff that you see, especially this day and age where you have social media, don't let that intimidate you. Remember that with discipline, that will take you such a long way. You just have to like stick to it. You just have to be determined. You don't have to drive yourself crazy or stress yourself out, but discipline and be consistent. So I just wanted to share that. I hope that you find that helpful.
Thank you so much for that. Well, consistency is very important. And if I've learned anything from my experience at Wacom, is to see how consistent artists are the most passionate artists. Thank you so much, guys.
Cool.
Have a lovely rest of your day, and we'll see you next Tuesday for the next Wacom webinar. I'm gonna start sharing my screen so that you can see our code one last time. It's Joel, Wacom Joel. 1 second, not working for me now.
Should I do stop share?
Yes, please.